Greetings from Tokyo, my dear friends. This is Daisuke, and I very much hope that this video finds you well and in very good spirits wherever you are in the world. I'd like to take this opportunity to introduce to you the video that you are about to see, which is a discussion that I had the great fortune of being able to have with this particular guest, a dear friend of mine. And he came along several weeks back, and we had a lovely time, and he shared with me at the time his recommendations for disaster movies. Now, if you recall, some time back, I did a 31 days of disaster movies thing on this channel where I uploaded a video a day talking about a particular disaster movie, thus the 31 days. And then what happened was, during that process, I was able to talk with my dear friend here, our guest. And so he came along, and he and I talked while the 31 days was going on. So the 31 days wasn't finished yet at that time, but we had a mutual sort of scheduling convenient time, and so we decided to talk. So the discussion that you're about to see was made while the 31 days was still going on, and so there might be some references to films that I had spoken about later, but again, not at the time of this particular discussion. That being said, I think it's a really fun one because our guest was sharing with us his takes and his recommendations about what disaster films and disaster movies that he would recommend to us. And so please, if you are interested and if you want a type of wrap-up, if you will, of the 31 days disaster movies discussion, then I hope you enjoy the following conversation. And cheers.
One, two, one, two, one, two, one, two.
Greetings from Tokyo, my dear friends. This is Daisuke, and I am thrilled to bits once again because we are joined once again by a very special guest. He has been very gracious in visiting this channel on a previous occasion, and he has very kindly agreed to a second discussion here. And we have a very special topic. But first of all, let me introduce or reintroduce this very famous gentleman, Mr. Brian Saur. Brian, hello.
Daisuke, thank you so much for having me back. I'm honored, and I'm excited about this topic. This is a topic you and I are both big fans of, so it's going to be fun.
Yes, and speaking of which, the topic of discussion today is 1970s disaster movies. So as some of you may know, this is a genre that I'm a big fan of, and there have been a number of occasions where I've tried to talk a little bit about some of these films that I really enjoy and part of physical media collection, etc. And Brian, our dear friend Brian, as we know, has his work on his great podcast, Just the Discs podcast, Pure Cinema podcast, and also his great YouTube channel. So I will leave the links to all these great podcasts and YouTube channel below. Please check them out. Subscribe for his YouTube channel, for example. Please subscribe and hit the notifications button and comment and check them out. They are very regular in terms of releases, and I'm very impressed with the frequency of the videos and also the podcast episodes. And Brian is just a prolific film lover, enthusiast, physical media collector, connoisseur, deluxe, everything you can imagine. And he is also a fan of 1970s disaster movies and also collector on physical media. And I understand that you have talked about disaster films on your podcasts before, correct?
Yes, on Pure Cinema, we did a disaster episode, which was a whole lot of fun. It was a sampler episode, so we broke it down into like, natural disasters and man-made disasters and personal disasters. We just went all over the place. But just want to say thank you so much for the incredibly gracious introduction, and I'm honored again to be back. And you are certainly one of the inspirations for my channel. Just seeing what you do and really being an admirer of it was part of what pushed me into the YouTube world, and it's been a real interesting journey so far. So I appreciate your kind support.
Oh, thank you so much. Very kind, but really, it's all down to your great efforts. And so I'm a big fan. I have been, and I always will be. So just keep up the excellent work. And yes, disaster movies. So
Yes.
what I thought would be very fun would be to hear from Brian directly. And so, what we have discussed and what we will do today is Brian will share with us a number of his recommendations for films that fall within the genre of 1970s disaster movies. And so, I don't know what he's chosen. And so I'm actually sitting on the edge of my seat. Actually, I'm sitting and I'm on the edge of my seat because I am so excited to hear what those choices are. And so I will be reacting in real time, as it were. But this is Brian's recommendation collection of 1970s disaster movies. And so Brian has very kindly prepared a collection, I understand, a number of titles,
Yes.
and we will go through them one at a time. Is that
Okay.
okay?
Sounds great.
All right. And so I
Um,
suppose before we go into the list proper, maybe could I just ask you, just generally, before we get into your list, what was your, say, set of criteria? How do you define the disaster movie genre? Are there any specific points that you kept in mind when you made your list, or anything you want to let us know before we get started?
sure. I'm just a big fan of the 70s cycle. I love that these films were so popular during that period. And so I'll just briefly, the way I've broken it down is I have four sort of all-timers, which I'm pretty sure you're a fan of all four. And then I have a bunch of others, several TV movies. I love that this phenomenon was so widespread that it infected not just cinemas, but televisions throughout the 1970s. And you had guys like Irwin Allen, who will come up a lot on my list, doing stuff for the theaters and doing stuff for the small screen. And I'm a fan of both things. Obviously, you can see the difference between the production value of the theatrical features and the TV, but so I have a bunch that are TV, but I still think they're a lot of fun. And in terms of the parameters, I mean, you know, usually there's some kind of actual disaster happening, but I do have a little bit of crossover with another genre that's near and dear to me, which is the animal attacks genre. I have one entry there that I think falls loosely into this category as well. So I'm going to rope it in because it's a favorite. But in general, it usually has to do with some kind of, natural disaster that is befalling a bunch of characters. And we have, a lot of soap opera drama between, the characters. And it's interesting. I always find that there's like at least one like totally throwaway subplot that you're just like, I don't mind it. But at the same time, I'm just like, well, this is the throwaway subplot in this movie. And actually, as I was watching these, I was noticing like, okay, here's that throwaway here. And that's not to demean the actors or their performances, but it's clear that these were not the primary characters. And it's almost like, I don't want to say filler, but it's just this thing where you have these extra characters that, you cut to and you're like, oh, these guys, well, they're not the major players, but okay, whatever. It's more drama. It's fine. It's fun. I'm into all of it. So, but yeah, that's sort of the general broad strokes of the group, if you will.
Thank you very much for that. Yes, I completely am in alignment with your assessment of the genre overall. And yes, I agree 100%. So, okay, so without further ado, my friend,
Okay.
would you please show us your first recommendation, 1970s disaster movie recommendation from Brian?
Okay, I'm gonna start at the top. We're gonna go number one and on down, basically. But I gotta go Towering Inferno for number one. It's really I know you're a big Poseidon Adventure fan. I'm not going to put Poseidon in a group, and that's, I mean, no offense in any way. I'm a big fan of that one as well. But I always see it as like a battle between Poseidon Adventure and Towering Inferno for the top slot for a lot of people. And for me, it's in recent years, Towering Inferno has won out, and I love the pace of it. I think it is, for a movie that's 2 hours and 45 minutes long, it is so well, first of all, it's incredibly well cast. As I should have mentioned, one of the great things about these movies is that you have these all-star casts. And so that alone, if you're a fan of actors like you and I are, it's just fun to watch them, do whatever, even in a not great disaster film. But this cast is ridiculous. Obviously, I think it was supposed to be two different movies and they combined them together. And so you have kind of a double force cast, because you have your main cast being Steve McQueen, Paul Newman, William Holden, Faye Dunaway. But then the supporting, you have like Robert Wagner, Robert Vaughn, Richard Chamberlain, Fred Astaire, Susan Blakely, and more. I mean, it just goes on and on. But I think for me, this movie just has that perfect build. The fire starts, I want to say within the first like 10 minutes of the movie, and then slowly they'll cut back and forth because it starts in a like utility closet or something, and then they'll cut back to it just the right amount, just when you're like, hey, what's, you get into the human drama of it all. You have William Holden as the guy sort of heading up this gigantic tower of glass, this skyscraper, the tallest building in the world. He's sort of the head honcho of it, and his son-in-law is played by Richard Chamberlain, who is one of the contractors who most definitely cut some corners in building this building, and is definitely responsible for some of the electrical problems which caused some of the fires. So there's that conflict. Then there's Paul Newman, the architect, who is also in conflict with Richard Chamberlain and kind of fighting with William Holden. And then Steve McQueen, who is the fire chief. And to me, I think this is, and I'm sure it's talked about, but to me, I think this is actually one of my favorite and one of the best Steve McQueen performances in any film ever. I think he is so great in it. Just so, I mean, he's very righteous about what he's doing, but he can back it up. Like, not only does he know why and how these things are happening and whose fault it is, but he also is super brave and will go out there and save people himself, and he's not just delegating. So it's really one of my favorite performances. And in the first scene with Paul Newman and Steve McQueen in the elevator, where he's talking to him about, you guys know we can't fight a fire over 7 floors, and yet you keep building them. And he's like, do you want to take me on or the fire? And just like that scene is just like such a great, like, kicking it off moment to see those two superstars together. I just love it. So anyway, it's just so well paced. And by the time you get to the end, it just keeps building on itself. And it is one of the most entertaining movies for me ever from Hollywood, pound for pound. And so it's really become my absolute favorite. I don't know where it lies for you, but it's definitely the top for me.
Oh, bravo, bravo, well done. You start with a bang. That's great. So yes, you're right. Steve McQueen or Paul Newman, or should I say, what is it? Steve McQueen and Paul. Yeah, the credits. Yeah, yeah.
Yes, that's right.
so it's right. So Paul Newman is what Steve McQueen is first, but he's lower than Paul Newman. Yeah, yeah. But that's a great one. Yeah, and you're so right. The cast is excellent. Steve McQueen and Paul Newman have this great chemistry, and they seem to be maybe friendly rivals. And we understand, I think, from the production background, that they work pretty well together, I think. And so
Yeah.
And they really, when they're out together, they really have this great chemistry. And then when they're doing their own separate thing, they're just carrying that part of the movie when they're on.
So
You're
much.
absolutely right. That moment between Steve McQueen and is it Dabney Coleman, right?
Oh,
And that
yeah.
little bit of dialogue about what's going to happen.
Yes.
Yeah, that's great. And
What about the scene where McQueen goes up to the top floor and he tells William Holden, "You're going to tell these people to leave now, or I'm going to do it."
Yeah.
And it's just this great power moment, and I love that too. It's just so powerful.
and before he gets to that point, right, he's in the elevator and it's him by himself and he's wondering, oh, I should take off my stuff so I don't want to cause a
Yes,
panic. So it's just,
it's a great
yeah,
moment.
yeah, yeah. It's such a humanizing moment. And you mentioned William Holden and Richard Chamberlain and Richard, like it's even down to the detail of their fashion, their clothes. Like Richard Chamberlain in that like brownish suit. Oh, that's such a bad guy. It's fashion. You know what I mean? Oh, it's perfect.
Absolutely.
And
Yes.
the Jim Duncan character, William Holden, that arc, he's the real, maybe he's, I don't know if he one would call him maybe ultimately responsible, or he's the head honcho big boss. I'm not sure, but you can really feel his torment, and he understands at a certain point what's the gravity of the situation, and there's a humanizing aspect to William Holden's performance. I think is fantastic. Yeah,
Yeah. Yeah. I love
yeah,
it. It's just like I said, and for a movie, as I get older, I really have come to study consciously or subconsciously the pacing of especially long films where you just feel like, okay, it's getting saggy here. Not that I'm a filmmaker, I couldn't do better, but you just notice certain things. You're like, well, this part isn't as exciting to me. But this movie, every time I watch it, it's just they just have put it together in such a way that I marvel at it. It's just so well done.
this is I can't stress enough how much I am in agreement with you. It's one of the best, if not it could be my favorite
Oh,
disaster film from this
yeah.
period ever. It
Yeah,
could
it's
be, yeah,
just so good. And it
yeah.
was weird to me because I remember watching it when I was younger and being like, "Oh yeah, that was pretty good." And especially as I've gotten older and then when we were doing the research for that disaster movie episode, I was suddenly just like absolutely blown away. Like again, I really liked it, but I got to the point where I'm like, "This is amazing and this is the best one for me." It just it clicked into place, and that's a great thing to happen as you get older. A movie that you liked you suddenly love. I just really love that progression.
Yeah, yeah, and I think we could go on because it's just so
Yeah.
great. But I should say one other thing. You mentioned Fred Astaire. I
Yes.
love how they show him dancing, but it's not like a Fred Astaire type of dancing. It's a pretty like just it's very much unexpected Fred Astaire type of. I love those little details that just you
Well,
have Fred Astaire, but you're not going to have him dance. You're just going to have him do a little. Yeah, okay. And Jennifer Jones is there. Yeah, I love this. But a wonderful character moment. Yeah,
and I would say my note about the slightly extraneous subplots, his would be the one. However, in this movie, I really don't necessarily feel like there are any. Like when I get emotionally hooked into his character so much that I don't know that is the one that I would say is that character relationship or that subplot. But for this movie, ultimately it doesn't matter. Like they all play well for me.
yeah, yeah. It's oh my goodness. I think yeah. Oh great. And even like things like the ice cream. The ice cream sundaes that they give the kids. Oh, it's such a great moment. Yeah, and
Absolutely.
yeah, yeah, and the elevator and the
Oh,
design and the huge scissors they cut for the opening. Oh, great stuff, great stuff. But
yeah.
yes, so Towering Inferno, well chosen for your first
Okay.
one. But
Thank you, sir.
yes, so but that's the first. So
Okay.
moving on,
Moving
what
on.
is the next choice for you?
This is another of my favorites, and it's probably my number two at the moment. Yeah, I think so. Earthquake. And this one again has also really grown on me. It was one that I used to work in a video store when I first moved to Los Angeles in the early 2000s. And one of my coworkers there, he was a little older, and he had actually worked in theaters. And I swear he told me he was working in a theater when Earthquake came out, or maybe he just remembered going to see it. I can't remember, but he introduced me to the concept of Sensurround. And that was immediately fascinating to me. What is this idea? And then you go and look it up. You're like, oh, it's a gigantic tower of speakers. And they would actually put it in some theaters and it would start to shake the theater apart. That is a really fascinating concept to me. So I loved Sensurround and I became obsessed with and I've actually, I haven't, I'm going to spoil this for you because you'll know what it is, but I have another Sensurround disaster movie on my pile. and there was only a few done in this way. And one of my favorites, I've talked about this probably too much between the podcasts, but one of my favorite screenings of a movie ever, especially a retrospective screening, was my wife and I went to UCLA, and they had a print of Earthquake, and they had an old one of the, I think maybe one of the last couple sense around decoders, so that they could, have the bass really cranking. And it was funny because they didn't really know, because it was so old. This was, early 2000s. It was so old they didn't really know what to do. So they let it play for a little while, and then they figured out that they could actually ride the bass themselves. So they were kind of improvising. And so that screening will never be duplicated, because they themselves were like cranking up the bass during certain, and it was so great, because it didn't totally shake the theater, but it really gave you a sense of what that must have been like. And it was such a blast. This movie, I think, it's there's some unintentional comedy in here, and just some things about it that I think make it a great audience film. I mean, one of my favorite moments, there's a it's just a throwaway, but like somebody's like, they're outside and somebody says, oh, turn the gas off. And this guy with a cigarette outside a house is like, I got it. And he goes inside and the house just blows up. And you're just like, what was that? And the other one is, there's an elevator crash at one point in the movie, and there's this cartoon blood thing that happens that I absolutely love. But again, this is another just great cast. You have Charlton Heston, and of course Ava Gardner, and Lauren Green, and George Kennedy, and Jean-Vier Bugeaud, and Richard Roundtree is awesome as this daredevil motorcyclist. And one of the most interesting and bizarre characters in any disaster movie ever is Marjoe Gortner's supermarket employee / National Guardsman, who is actually totally unhinged and psychotic. And we don't really know that at the beginning. You're just like, what is the deal with this guy? And then suddenly he's taking hostages, and he's absolutely out of his mind. And so that would be a throwaway subplot, except he's so crazy that you're like more entertained by it than you ever would be by normal subplots like that. So I love the setup. You have the standard kind of like people, you have the seismologist guys talking about what's coming. You have one guy who's actually saying, this, I think I may have pinpointed the big one. I think it's coming. And this is another thing that I'm sure you've talked about in all your videos, is the idea that there's always somebody who's trying to warn people that this is coming. And there's always at least one, if not two people who are like, you don't know what you're talking about. And they're always wrong, and they usually end up dead, which is kind of the interesting karma of these movies, which I think is always entertaining. Like slasher movies, if you're promiscuous or use drugs in those, you tend to be killed. I feel like if you're the dissenter in these movies, you end up dying. And a lot of people end up dying. It's not necessarily, even if you aren't, you might be dead. But I do like that the movies tend to punish those characters. But yeah, it's just such a great setup, and it's a great Los Angeles movie. And I think for me, that's the other reason it's a big favorite of mine, is because, moving to Los Angeles from the Midwest like I did, it just really was one of those movies where I was like, now I kind of know the city, and I kind of know where things are happening, and I've been to those places, and it made it more intimate for me in this way. And I've lived through, quote unquote. I've certainly experienced my fair share of earthquakes, obviously nothing too big, but my fair share since moving to California about 20 years ago. So, it's just one of those things when especially for me, having come again from the Midwest to California, and always having heard about earthquakes, and then having to experience them, and they're pretty freaky. And then seeing this movie, it just all wraps together, and it becomes an absolute favorite for me. So I assume this is probably one you're a fan of as well.
Yes, well chosen. And that's what is it? The Shout Select series,
Yes,
right?
really great.
And that
disc.
and it has two discs, right? The
Mhm.
one with the theatrical cut, and then the television version that came a little bit later, right? And
Now, remind me, I think I'm remembering this right, because I've seen a few of these where they have a TV version. Isn't there, in the TV version, isn't there this whole subplot where there's some people on a plane flying over? Am I wrong?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Okay. Yeah,
I
remember
they
that.
added that. Yeah.
And I'm just like, this is such an interesting filler. These people are not on the ground at all. And anyway, I'm fascinated by television versions of movies. I often don't prefer them to theatrical versions, but I love to know that they exist, and I usually like to watch them at least one time.
And that there's a lot of interesting extensions, as it were. So that's one that you refer to, the this story about this couple in an airplane, and I think, oh, I'm about to go work for the Charlton Heston character, so that's how
Oh,
they try
that's
to
what it
connect. Yeah,
was.
yeah,
Yes,
yeah,
yes, yes.
yeah. And
Okay.
there's like a magazine with Charlton
Yes,
Heston's
yes, I remember.
right on the cover. Okay, it's wonderful, brilliant. And then there's also some backstory with the subplot that you were referring to, and this employee who ends up becoming very important, and Victoria Principal's character, and that
Yeah.
sort of, yeah. So
Oh,
uh,
and I totally forgot to mention the most random cameo almost in any movie ever is drunken Walter Matthau looking like a 70s pimp in the bar, drinking his way through the earthquake. I mean, that's amazing. That's just such a winner for me.
yes, and I think, yes, that, and also in that sequence, George Kennedy is a
Yes.
very in this role where his character has a sense of righteousness and a kind of crisis, a real personal crisis. And oh my goodness, what a time to have a personal crisis, right? At the time when you have this life-changing event that occurs that will affect the entire city. Yes, this is the precise moment when he's having his crisis, and he will be tested, and to see whether he will stand through in terms of his hero or not. Yeah, it's perfect. And also other crises as well, personal conflicts. Charlton Heston, Ava Gard, what a relationship. Yeah.
Their
And
marriage is so
wow.
so rough to watch.
Yeah, yeah.
He's actually a kind of a favorite of mine. I have a weird fondness for Heston. Like I find him to be um kind of a consummate overactor most of the time, but sometimes it really works. Sometimes I buy it emotionally, and I don't even really see the overacting anymore because I just like his presence, and so this is a big favorite of mine. And their marriage is terribly rough in this movie, so that's entertaining to watch for sure. And it makes for an
Yes.
interesting ending. Not to spoil the movie, but it makes for an interesting ending for sure.
Yes, yes. Talk about, the point where all the choices come together at this precise moment. My goodness. But
Right?
anyway, yes.
Yeah.
That's the stuff. This is the stuff this is why these films are so great. Yeah.
I mean, I
And
get that some people aren't going to go for the soap opera drama of it, but I think if you're a fan of the genre, that stuff is just as enjoyable as the actual disaster. I mean, the other thing that's great about these movies is that it's not CG. You're often getting people where they're getting debris dropped on them and it looks dangerous, and you have some crazy stunts in all these movies, and I think that stuff to me also stands out in a time, not to harp on CG, but like certainly these movies would not look anywhere near the way that they do. And some will say that they look cheesy now, but I actually think between the matte shots and the sort of studio backlot special effects stuff, just the general ragtag way that they put these together, there's a really, I don't know, there's something about it that just is so endearing to me.
yeah, that's well said. I agree 1000%. There's a charm in terms of the types of techniques, cinematic techniques that are employed, and also it's a very wide scope in terms of the disaster and its affecting range. It affects many people in a vast, say, scope of environment or environments, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
And in that way, it has a sprawling, almost. It feels almost like, I mean, I know a lot of these disaster films have this large cast and all-star cast, various characters that come together through certain circumstances, and I get that. But for some reason, I think Earthquake in particular, that's very strong, and it has this networking effect that it's almost like a Robert Altman film.
Yeah.
Robert Altman, I think,
Absolutely.
right? And this is in 74.
It's kind of a shame
So
he never made one. I mean, I get that he never would, but I would have kind of loved to have seen his version of one.
yeah, yeah, just it this feels like, my goodness, if Robert Altman made a disaster film, it might have had a similar feeling like Earthquake. I don't know,
Yeah, definitely.
but yeah, great choice, great choice. And also that's a great release. And I think also there was a, what was it? I think that disc had a replacement program as well.
Yeah, I think it
Yeah,
did. I think you're right.
yeah. So, but and it's still ongoing. I remember I had to mail in for my replacement disc of that, but
Oof.
it's still it was a minor thing, but it was a complete hassle-free experience. So,
Yeah.
all in all, a great release and a great physical media copy. But Earthquake, all right, and so that's the second one. But now
Yes.
continuing on, my friend.
Okay. So another sense around favorite. This one is huge for me. This is Roller Coaster. And this is, I believe, yeah, this is post Earthquake. I want to say there were only four films that I can think of that were made in sense around. It was Earthquake, Roller Coaster, Midway, and Battlestar Galactica. I think are the four. Um, and so this is another one that would have been really great to see in a theater, especially because it's got a it opens like, I mean, for those that have seen Final Destination 3, uh I'd like to think that this movie is something of an influence. The idea basically is that you have a mad bomber, which is a character that comes up, I feel like, in a couple of these. I feel like there's another mad bomber, another one I can't think of right now. But he's played by Timothy Bottoms, and he's very good. He's just very reserved. And the opening is him setting up a bomb on this roller coaster, and we get to see in real time, him sort of observing what's happening. It's a great build. It's like a slasher movie in that way. You get the inciting incident. You're like, this is what this guy is capable of. And so you get to see him. It's a simple explosive device, but it just blows up part of the track that is just enough to completely derail this roller coaster. And it's a pretty horrible crash. Granted, there are some cheesy elements. Like there's one there's one point when the coaster falls over on the top of itself, and you can kind of see that there are dummies inside getting crushed. But you also see some people, when the thing flies off the coaster, there's some stuntmen that go jumping off of it, and that stuff is really, it's a really alarming to this day sequence, because I think, we've all probably been on a roller coaster, and the idea of, oh my god, if that happened, what would I do? There's no escape. You're probably going to be dead. There's just almost no surviving it. So that's a really great open. And then it has another great, cast of characters. George Siegel, who is actually one of my favorite actors of the 1970s. And I think he's a really fascinating guy who had a great run in the 70s of all kinds of wonderful films, from California Split to The Hot Rock to this to, I mean, he just did so much great stuff. But he plays a roller coaster safety inspector. And his boss is played by Henry Fonda, I think. And he is the guy who last inspected the first coaster that blows up. So he suddenly gets embroiled in this, whatever is happening. And then, we start to see, the Timothy Bottoms character becomes obsessed with him and starts calling him on the phone and kind of hinting to him, I'm going to do this stuff and this is where I might do it. And I love Siegel's character because it's a great, again, personal crisis. He's divorced. His daughter is played by, oh shoot, I'm forgetting now. You probably know, right?
It's Helen Hunt.
Thank you. Yes, Helen Hunt, and he's trying to quit smoking at the beginning of the movie. And there's this great business where he's in a room smoking, and they're actually using electric shock treatment to try and get him to stop. And that's when he gets the call about the roller coaster. So he's quitting smoking during the movie. That's a character thing. And so he's already kind of a sarcastic, grumpy guy, but the fact that he's quitting smoking makes him amped up even more so. So he's just snippy with everybody, but it's ultimately very endearing. And another one of my favorites in these films, and he'll come up in my next one, is Richard Widmark, who is also one of the great grumps of especially 70s cinema. He's just in there to be grumpy. And in this case, he's like, I can't remember if he's with the FBI or I can't remember what organization of police he's with, but he basically is the guy overseeing this whole thing. And so he is talking to George Siegel, and they are just kind of tearing at each other. They're just kind of sniping each other, and it's just absolutely wonderful, the way that they become entangled. And yeah, it's just a really great movie. So then it just becomes kind of this thing where they're trying to figure out which amusement park this guy will hit next. And then there's a great sequence where he wants money. He's asking for basically a ransom to not do this anymore. And he makes George Siegel the guy who will deliver the ransom. And it's a wonderful sequence where he's going around the amusement park, just doing what Timothy Bottoms says. and finding the drop point, and the cops are trying to figure out, where is he? Can we catch him? And anyway, I just love the dynamic in this one, and I actually also really love amusement parks. I don't go as much as I used to, but they just remind me of summer, and they remind me of simpler times, and so there's something about that as a backdrop to this that is really entertaining to me. It just reminds me of a time when we weren't tethered to phones or anything like that. You had to go out and do stuff, and not that we don't do that now. I'm not trying to be that guy, but like that was the only choice. You had to go out and go to an amusement park or go bowling or do whatever. So I really like that about it as well. But again, I'm sure you're a fan of this.
Yes, again, bravo, bravo. I love Roller Coaster. I love it. I think it's fantastic. Uh it's scary. You're
Yeah.
right. There's this immediacy, there's a sense of, I mean, I've been on roller coasters and I always think, oh, what if, and if I follow that through, I'm just
It's the
terrified.
worst.
Oh my goodness. And to see it play out in the film the way it does, and everyone's at, oh my goodness. And just creepy things. The Timothy Bottoms character, just creepy things. The way that the controller is designed, it's this little box thing with a button, and he pulls the antenna thing out. Just that's it. But
When
it
there's
causes,
this
yeah.
fetishistic nature to the way that he zips and unzips the pocket. There's just this weird, like, it's a strange. It's definitely a character thing he's doing, and I've noticed it more and more each time he unzips it and he pulls it out. It's very there's something really extra creepy about that.
Yeah, and his voice too when he's
Yes,
talking with George Siegel's character. It has this protagonist antagonist thing that we see a lot in these films, but there's a great kind of a tense type of almost chemistry, if you will. They really work off of each other very well.
yeah.
And it adds to the tension and the base. I have a question about this. Do you consider this to be a disaster film in the way that we say have considered past films you've discussed so far, like Towering Inferno and Earthquake?
I mean, this is where when we did our pure cinema and we broke it down into the different types, I do think man-made disaster fits. So for me, I've always kind of thought of it in the same, as much as it's not a natural disaster, I feel like there's still sort of a catastrophic death factor, and the unpredictability of who will it strike. And I think those things are the ones, the elements that I sort of identify with this. So yeah, in a way, I know it doesn't exactly fit, but I've always thought of it in the same breath as these others.
Yeah, I agree. I agree, and it shows, I think, the what I like to call the malleability of the genre. It really
Yes.
and it's a disaster film slash, say, like police procedural thriller,
Yeah. Yeah.
or a cat and mouse chase type of film, that sort of thing. And
Yep.
so, and it has those sequences too, like the trying to disarm the wiring mechanism, which is so, you get that in a film, it's so suspenseful. But here, it's even more suspenseful. And I love too how it's a network of people that are trying to stop this particular thing. And so sometimes we're following someone, and we don't even know who this person is, but we're so invested in this particular part while the other characters that we follow are doing their thing. And I just love this sense of a team effort, as it were, trying to solve this particular mystery.
Yeah.
And a lot that's there's a lot of information that we get that's revealed, but also stuff that's withheld in
Yes.
terms of characterizations and motives, which I think is also an interesting choice. So
Absolutely.
yeah, Roller Coaster, bravo, bravo. I
Thank
agree,
you, sir.
yes. But yes,
Okay. Last of the four favorites, and then I'll go into a bunch of TV movies and a few other things. And I know we've been talking about this one kind of before we even did this. The Swarm. Yes, this one to me, again, this crosses over between the animal attacks and the disaster. But they are such, I mean, for lack of a better word, an absolute force of nature, these swarms of bees. This one has always fascinated me. And I know that it's, I'm sure many would say at 156 minutes, it's definitely over long, but I disagree because again, this is the drama of this movie, even as silly. And we've been talking about, in particular, the love triangle between Olivia de Havilland and Ben Johnson and Fred McMurray. And that just, none of these, I don't think any of the other ones, I don't think any of the other ones that I can think of have the love triangle per se. They definitely, maybe there's another one, but that's fascinating to me. But just the idea that you have, again, Richard Widmark back again as a grumpy military dude, but this time, instead of a sarcastic, snipey guy, you have Michael Caine as the scientist who is aggro. Like, he is straight up yelling in a way that I've seen Michael. I mean, Michael Caine has definitely yelled in a lot of movies, but he yells quite a lot at Richard Widmark in this movie. And it almost seems like, I'm not to denigrate his acting, because he's obviously one of the great actors of all time, but it almost seems like he really qualifies his performance on volume, because he just gets so loud. And Richard Widmark is just, again, still so grumpy with him, and very much the guy who's like, you don't know what you're talking about. We should solve this in the military way. And, again, a really incredible cast. You have, again, Michael Caine, you have Catherine Ross, Richard Chamberlain is back in a smaller part. You have Lee Grant, Jose Ferrer, Patty Duke, Slim Pickens. These are smaller roles. Bradford Dillman, who's another one that I think of when I think of the 70s and disaster movies. He's a guy that I got to know through those films. Like, he's the sort of a Charlton Heston Jr. He has the same kind of clenched jaw thing that he does. And he has certain tics about him that remind me of Heston. But he's sort of a second in command to Widmark. But yeah, the whole idea is that you have these bees attacking people. And part of the fun of the movie is you have all these incredible slow motion sequences of people screaming and falling and just generally running and falling through glass as they're dodging bees. And it is so ridiculous and yet so entertaining. And again, this is Irwin Allen, and he is the guy who I most associate with these, and he's definitely going to come up several more times in my pile here. So this one, it's not the high quality, in quotes, movie that Towering Inferno is, but for me, it is an entertainment powerhouse in a similar way. And I know you're a fan of this too.
Well done. I'm in total agreement. Yes, it is cheese to the max, but it is also pretty scary in a lot of places. You have, I mean, it's people who fall victim that you wouldn't expect. Oh, the film's going to go in that direction. Wow, that's pretty creepy. And also the performances. There's also, I think, another appearance by Henry Fonda.
Yes, I forgot to mention him.
Yeah, in a very memorable role. My goodness. And
just rewatching it now, I've forgotten what happened with his character. And then I was suddenly reinvested. I was like, oh, what? Oh my God, I totally forgot that happened. And then there's that whole thing, the reoccurring thing of people seeing this giant bee after they've been stung. This giant bee appears before them and freaks them out. So you have a lot of characters hallucinating this giant bee and screaming and freaking out. That's really entertaining as well.
Yes, and it's also an occurrence of where we see characters, or we see performers who appear in other disaster films from the era. And you mentioned Michael Caine. He does appear elsewhere, whose performance here is, oh my goodness, this is one for the ages, really. And just the passion that he gives, and his character, I think, is essentially a citizen, a private citizen who's been tapped by the president, I think, to lead the entire project, I think, over the military. And so he's basically making decisions, and he's everywhere. He's in every spot and where key decisions have to be, which is brilliant, absolutely brilliant. And there's tension with Richard Widmark character in that. But you think, well, actually, who's really correct in terms of strategy? That brings up an interesting conundrum, if you will, in terms of viewing this. So there's a lot here in terms of sort of what's the phrase? There's a lot of layers.
Yes.
And it's so over the top in terms of entertainment. The slow motion sequences, as you indicated, are sublime.
Yes.
And I think another performer that appears a lot in these films, or maybe to a certain degree, is Slim Pickens.
Yes.
And I always like this performance here by Slim Pickens. My goodness, it's a pretty brief moment, but Wow, what an
Heartbreaking,
impact. Yes.
heartbreaking.
Wow.
Yeah,
Wow.
not to give away too much, but I forgot how impactful he is in the short amount of time that he's on screen, and the way that he exits the film. I was just like, oh man, how it was actually hard to watch because I'm so used to him being such a jovial jokester. He's one of my favorite character actors. And again, I'd sort of forgotten. It had been a while. I love this movie, but I was just literally rewatching it today. And I think the other thing to me that there's a lot of stuff that stands out, but the idea of soldiers in white, it's on the cover, soldiers in white flame retardant suits blasting bees with flamethrowers is a really great, for me, cinematic image, and the way that fire comes into the movie towards the end and how a lot of people end up on fire for a movie that's not a fire movie. You know what I mean? It's pretty great.
This is one too where I think the scope of the disaster is so broad. I mean, it could
Yeah.
go basically anywhere, and it's so amorphous. And I think the film does a really adequate job in trying to keep everything within bounds of understandability. I know it's very hard. It's not a enclosed location, so sometimes this makes it difficult for a viewer to keep up with the different geographical locations. But I think this film does a really good job of establishing the characters, setting up the particular, like the small towns and the operation station and the various
The
parks.
flower festival,
Yeah,
which it's so laughable when you're in a B movie and you see there's a flower festival. You're like, oh my gosh, the
a
irony.
flower festival in a B movie. Yeah. Unbelievable. But yeah, bravo, well done. I love the choices. So
Thank you, sir.
so the Towering Inferno and Earthquake and Roller Coaster and The Swarm. So these are what you call the all-time classics, I think. So
For me, yeah, absolutely. These are the ones that I have seen many times and that I really give me the warm and fuzzy feeling I want from these movies. They just connect. Yeah, those are the ones. Again, Poseidon Adventure is also great. But I know eventually you'll be talking about that one, so I wanted to kind of leave that for you to discuss. But I like that film as well, for sure.
oh, me too. Yeah, yeah, and as well beyond the Poseidon Adventure too. Speaking of Michael Caine,
Michael Caine, yes,
but
exactly.
but yes. So let's continue on.
Okay.
So what are your next choices? So your recommendations for 1970s disaster movies?
Okay, so I have four. Actually a fifth TV movie. That the fifth one will be real brief, but this one is a real favorite for me, and I think this is a really underseen film. This is a Warner Archive release. It's called The Beasts Are on the Streets, and it's from, I want to say, 78 or so. And it's produced by Hanna-Barbera, which I think is fascinating. The idea behind this one is that you have basically a safari game park. And I forget where in the world this takes place. But they used to do this a little bit more where it's like an open, park where they have a tram and they, sort of drive you around, and they have the animals in these really not particularly well cordoned off, chain link fenced areas. So you have lions and tigers and elephants and all these things. And so you basically have this safari park that exists. And what happens is you have some rednecks, as you can see this guy in the back here. They start hassling this truck driver. He's got a big tanker truck, and they start hassling him for whatever reason. And they get pulled over, and he laughs at them. He honks his horn as he drives by, like, you guys got pulled over. And so then they decide they're going to really mess with him. And they're hunters. They're real rednecky types. And one of the guys pulls up next to the dude, and he pulls out his gun, as you can see here, and points it at this driver. And this guy's a little bit overweight, and you can already see he's sweating, and he's got some kind of vision problem. You see certain POVs where he suddenly is a little blurry. And so this, what looks like it's going to be a fatal attack freaks him out. He has to pull off to the side of the road. He tries to take some medication, and then he starts to drive again, and he has some kind of weird breakdown, and he crashes his truck into the guardrail fence at the outside of the safari park and rips down a good, quite a bit of it. And so suddenly you have these animals loose on the freeway, which I kind of love that stuff. You have lions attacking people in their cars. You have elephants stepping on cars. And then basically they get loose into the suburban neighborhoods. And so then the crux of the movie becomes the employees of the park, which are played by Carol Lindley and Philip Michael Thomas. Um, I'm trying to think if there's others that you would recognize. And I know there's others in here. Also, this is directed by Peter Hunt, which I know you're a fan of his. He's all about James Bond. So I find that an interesting connection. But anyway, there's just something really fascinating about this, about how they go about recapturing all the animals and all the peril that happens because of the animals that are just let loose. And there are definitely some things in it. I swear there's an American Humane Association, stamp at the front, but there's some things in here that are kind of questionable about, like there's a lion trying to run down a horse and the lion seems to get like kicked in the face. And you're like, that didn't look right. I don't know how that works. But so there's that sort of wild, wild west, if you will, to it. But I just really love this movie. And I hadn't heard of it until Warner Archive put this DVD out, but I really do consider it a disaster movie in the same sense as The Swarm, where you have animals on the loose attacking people and you have people trying to contain them. And I'm a big fan. So I definitely highly recommend The Beasts Are on the Street. Have you seen this one?
No, I haven't. And
Oh, all right.
I didn't even know that it was released on DVD like this. So I'm gonna order it right now.
I know you're gonna dig it. I just know you're gonna. I'd love to hear what you think when you see it. It's not gonna blow your mind, but like it's just a lot of fun to see these people in their cars. I can't. I don't know. It's just one of those things for me that's fun to watch. Animal peril, people in peril from animals.
And Carol
Um,
Lindley is in it too, as you mentioned, right? So
yeah,
there's
she works there, and she's and again they have like some personal drama. Like one of the guys wants to move to Kenya, or she wants to, and so you have your standard soap opera drama as you do in these films. So it checks that box, if you will. But yeah, it's just a blast. I'm a huge fan.
and Peter Hunt is the director,
Yes,
the
sir.
director of On Her Majesty's Secret Service, Peter Hunt.
Yes.
That's amazing. All right, I'm
Yeah,
gonna
such a neat combination. Hanna-Barbera, Peter Hunt, and the zoo animals attacking people.
amazing. So, and Carol Lindley shows she also appeared in the Poseidon Adventure.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes,
Okay. All right.
absolutely.
Okay. You've taught me yet another something new yet again, my friend. So
Okay. Well,
all right. So
I'm
great,
glad.
great.
I'm glad to turn you on to it because I think you'll enjoy it. Now,
Oh,
the next three that I have, I know you're familiar with. These are all Irwin Allen produced television movies. I'm going to start with Flood, which I want to say is 75 or 76. 76. And this one is it's so funny to me, the movie, the way that the the influence of Jaws was felt reverberating through all kinds of film media post 1975, because this movie reeks of Jaws. Like it very much has that same vibe. Basically, you have a small resort community that relies on a large man-made lake that is held back by a giant dam, and you have Robert Culp as a helicopter pilot, and uh, he transports people around. He brings people into this resort. It's a very remote resort for fishing and things like that, but the town really relies on the tourism. So what happens is you start one small kid actually he gets squirted in the face by a leak from the dam, and it actually knocks him over and he's hurt, and actually Culp has to take him to a hospital. But that's where they discover maybe the dam's not sound. Maybe we got a problem here. And then you have the whole not Murray Hamilton isn't in this movie, but you have very much the Murray Hamilton type mayor dude who's like, because the initial thought, it's like, well, if we open and slowly drain the lake, then we can control it and we won't have any kind of a flood. And of course, everybody's like, no, we can't do that. It'll ruin our economy. And, Culp is sort of on the fence, but he starts to come around. And of course, things go bad and the dam does break, and it's a pretty epic explosion of water, and it definitely kills some people. And this is definitely my favorite of the three that I'm going to talk about. I'm a huge Robert Culp fan. I don't know how you feel about him or this film, but I like this a lot.
yeah. I'm so glad you mentioned this. So this is very much like Jaws. You're right, in the template of the mayor who doesn't want to cause any destruction to the economy. I think it has to do with the fishing.
Yeah.
And yeah, the dam, or it's like a mound of dirt, I
Yeah,
think.
it's like
Yeah,
rocks.
yeah, yeah. So and then I think and then Carol Lindley is. We spoke of Carol. She's in
Oh
this
yeah,
as
that's right.
well,
I forgot she's in this. Yes.
and I think she's
Barbara
married to.
Hershey.
Yes, yes,
Oh yeah, I
uh,
forgot about this cast. Barbara Hershey, Richard Basehart,
yes.
Roddy McDowell, Cameron Mitchell, Eric Olson, who is in Poseidon Adventure, I believe. Maybe I'm thinking he's the kid. I thought maybe I'm thinking of a different kid. Maybe it's Eric something else. Teresa Wright. Um, yeah, very good little cast for this TV movie. I like it a lot.
Yeah, and Teresa Wright, right? She there's a lot of physicality in terms of the water, and Teresa Wright really gets into the thick of things.
She does.
And Barbara Hershey and Martin Milner and Robert Culp have this sort of buddy duo type of thing. They're tag teaming. They're trying to rescue and save that. Richard Basehart too, who is in like Fellini movies,
Yeah,
and
and
he's
film
now
noir. I mean, he's
yeah,
so such an old school guy.
and he plays the sort of the mayor type, and yeah, it's a great little. I mean, I say little. I mean, it's a TV movie, but it's I think it's really well constructed. There are some I don't know. There are some pretty over the top moments there, but that's part of the charm of this genre. But yeah, well
Absolutely.
chosen. Yeah, this is also from Warner's, right?
Yes, Warner
Archive
Archive.
Collection DVD, right?
Yeah, there's a couple that I won't talk about, like Hanging by a Thread and The Night the Bridge Fell Down, which are to me don't exactly fall into the same category because they're like mini series. They're like epically long, like way like
Two
hours
discs,
and
right? Yeah,
yeah,
yeah, yeah.
like way too long. So I just didn't
Yeah,
want to. I like those two. They're all part of the same group from Warner Archive. So if you're
yeah.
into this stuff, you should check out Hanging by a Thread and the Bridge Fell Down. Although Night the Bridge Fell Down is maybe my least favorite of all of them. It's all
Mm.
right. But next up, Fire. So you have the success of Flood, and then what else can we do? Let's do the opposite. Let's do Fire. So you have sort of a resort, a lodge in. I looked it up. I guess it was shot in Oregon, and so it's kind of remote. And it is run by Vera Miles, and she's being romanced by Ernest Borgnine, who is obviously also a staple of these films. He will come up again in a later pick. He runs, I think, uh, some kind of wood lumber thing. And so he's always romancing her, and they're at the end of the season, so they're closing up the I think they're closing up the resort cabin, this giant cabin thing. And so you have that sort of stuff, and then you have some convicts, among them played by Eric Estrada and Neville Brand, who are doing like field work, or they're doing work in the woods for the prison, and they're being overseen. I think this is an interesting connection by actor Ty Harden, who Tarantino mentioned was one of the actors that he sort of modeled Rick Dalton after. Like the career of Ty Harden is one of the careers that was sort of the trajectory that Rick Dalton was on. So seeing Ty Harden after having sort of known, I wasn't really even aware of him until Tarantino started talking about him in relation to that. And I'd seen this movie, but I hadn't known who he was then. And then rewatching it, I'm like, oh, Ty Harden. Oh, that's so neat. So anyway, what the impetus is basically that Eric Estrada and Neville Brand hatch a plan to escape. They're going to start a fire and see if what happens, if they can maybe make their escape. And it ends up getting put out. Ty Harden's, catches it, and then they, all the convicts ends up getting taken away, but the fire is not stopped. And so then you have the fire starting up again. And I'm trying to think, you also have Patty Duke Aston. Who else is in this? Gene Evans. Gene Evans plays like the guy who's sort of the fire commander, like the guy who's trying to manage. He's like kind of the Steve McQueen of the movie in a way. And he's sort of managing the fire, but Borgnine is there helping, and Borgnine's very rich, and so he can be like, fly in a bulldozer and something else, like just great stuff like that. But yeah, the fire starts to spread really quickly, and then the lodge gets blocked off. The road to the lodge is blocked off, and they have to figure out another way. And it's another one where certain characters don't make it, and it's I find it entertaining to watch a film like, and again, living in California, fire season is very real to us every year. It happens more than once a year. We have big fires. Like I live in an area where we've been real close to some serious damage, like not literally knocking on my door, but like within a mile of my house, really close. And so watching something like this is a bit harrowing on that level because I've seen it. I've seen footage of people driving through the fires that are happening within 15, 20 miles of my house, and so this reminds me of that. And it's very, it's not bad. It works. It's also directed by Earl Bellamy, who directed Flood, and again produced by Irwin Allen. So you have sort of the hand of Irwin Allen and his structure, and this. It's really, you feel like it's not a cookie cutter, but he's definitely got a certain kind of patterns that he's like, okay, we need this thing and we need this and this, and he does it well. It works. So I like this one too. I can't remember if you're a fan or I know if you've just seen it and liked it or not.
Yeah, I love this film. I
Oh,
remember
nice.
seeing it actually when I saw it as a kid. I was broadcast on TV, and I just
Oh,
turned
wow.
on the TV. And actually, I saw the end. I saw the very end of the film first, so I saw the ending. So there's some stuff that happens to some of the main characters. I don't want to go into too much detail, but some of it's pretty intense. And so I just, ever since then, I've just remembered this film and how kind of heartbroken I felt in certain moments.
Yeah.
And then I just found out about this DVD, and yeah, so I have this one. Yeah, so yep, it's right here. So
Nice.
yeah,
Very
so,
nice.
and you're right, Patty. So here we have again Ernest Borgnine making
Yeah.
appearance again. Patty Duke. I mean, you mentioned the Swarm earlier, and I like, and Eric Estrada too. I think he's in Airport 1975 as
Oh,
well.
good
Yeah. So
catch. Yeah.
so and others. So this is another great type of, how should I put it? It's another one where it's sprawling and it affects a wide terrain, but I think it does a really good job in keeping track of where we are. Um, and it's pretty devastating. I think there's a lot of that soap opera dynamic, but I think the soap opera dynamic stuff, it's there's a lot of seriousness. There's a serious edge to this film, I would suggest, which makes
I
it
agree.
very overwhelming when some of the character arcs develop the way they do. Yeah.
Yeah. No, absolutely.
Well,
Absolutely.
yeah, that's a great choice. Yeah.
Yeah, I feel like these are a little lesser known. Like you and I know them, but maybe people who are starting to just dip their toes in might not know. And the third one is Cave In, which is definitely the least of the three. But this one definitely has, I think, a lot of earthquake vibes because you're dealing with a similar kind of thing. Yes, I love it. So this one is again Irwin Allen produced. I want to say it was made in '79, and I was talking to you off mic. I think it wasn't actually. I was reading it wasn't actually broadcast until 1983, which is a shame because it really should have been broadcast in the '70s. But so this one has Leslie Nielsen. It has let's see here, James Olsen. It has a very grumpy Ray Milland, who is like he's like an archaeologist trying to prove the existence of like Cro-Magnon man, and so I don't know. So I couldn't tell you. But anyway, there's this whole drama between he and his daughter. The fun thing about this one that the other ones don't have is that we get inside this cave. It's a 5-mile cave. I think it's in, oh shoot, I looked it up and I forgot now where the actual caves are. But it's, they got the stalactites, and you go down into these caves, and so you have the Ray Milland character with his daughter doing research. You have Leslie Nielsen and his wife joining them on their tour, and Ray Milland being particularly grumpy that he has to share a tour with anybody. And then Leslie, okay, here's the thing. So then you have all these flashbacks. You don't know who these characters are, and suddenly when they're in the cave, we flash back to Leslie Nielsen and his police drama, like where he lost his partner and how he got kicked off the force. And there's some weird police, Naked Gun parallels in terms of like this weird alternate serious dimension of police drama that he's playing. That's very strange in retrospect. But then you have this James Olsen character, who's an actor that I like, and I've only really recently started to get into. He reminds me a little bit of James Rebhorn and James Woods, like a combination of the two or something. And he plays like a bank robber who we see at the beginning of the film has escaped the cops, and I think he maybe kills a cop, and he escapes into the caves. And then, we have this senator character played by, oh shoot, Susan Sullivan, maybe. I'm gonna forget which actor that is. And she has a drama with one of the guys who is like one of the rangers that works at the cave. We get to see their whole, relationship flashback. And they have a cave in one of the caves at the beginning, and she's come as the senator for some reason to check out this cave for safety. And they tell her, don't go in this one area because it's just had a cave in. And she's like, well, I really got to check that area out. And of course she gets caved in, and James Olsen suddenly shows up, and he's like, oh, I got lost. I was on a tour. And he plays a really scary, paranoid psychotic who, we actually get to see a scene with like him and a, like, I don't know, like a police therapist or something, and him talking about how everybody's out to get him, and, the whole world is against him. It's just classic, like, paranoia. And he's just so on edge the whole time, and he's got a gun. And then Leslie Nielsen immediately doesn't like him. So you're just like, oh my God, is Leslie Nielsen going to get shot by this guy at some point? So anyway, there's all this drama as they're trying to get out of the cave. They have to go like, under this underwater thing that you can get out to one thing, and there's a shaky rope bridge. Shaky bridges are actually kind of a regular thing in these movies. They'll come up in the next one I'm going to talk about. And there's just some other general like earthquakey, rock falling, people trying to get through tight spaces and not falling to their death kind of stuff. But yeah, it does it's kind of like Earthquake Junior a little bit in my mind. But so you're a fan of this one too?
Yeah, I love this. This is really, there's a lot of pretty kind of corny things about this film, which I love.
Absolutely. Me too.
It's so campy, and you mentioned a lot of them. I agree with everything. And James Olsen as this criminal on the run. I think he has this wonderful, like he's on the run, and yet he has this very conspicuous, I think, yellow jacket. I think. And so yeah,
like
yeah,
breaker or something.
Yeah, it's great, and he's I think he may be known also from his performance in films like the Andromeda Strain, and he's, I think, the priest in Amityville 2, and
there's one called Moon 02. Have you ever seen that one?
Yeah.
That's the first one I saw him in. I was like, who's that guy? I kind of like Moon 02 is totally cheesy, and I can't even remember the full plot of it, but I do like it. It's another Warner Archive DVD that I have somewhere, but I'm a fan of Moon 02, and that's where I first saw him.
Yeah, he's great. And he has this, he gives the to think the situation alone was, I think, it's a very scary one. The cave in and the characters that we see, and each has their own specific drama that they have to work out. You mentioned Leslie Nielsen's cop, or former cop, I think. He didn't do it right. Well, I don't want to go into too many details, but how did that happen? Who made that decision? I don't know what was their thinking. But anyway, and we mentioned before, like, I love how he's in the flashbacks. He's, it's like there's a shootout, but it's like Frank Drebin, police squad. It's like he's like going like this, it's great. Yeah. So this is one of the most Frank Drebin-y performances from Leslie Nielsen. It's wonderful. Sure. And Ray Milland's great. But you think in this situation, which is pretty harrowing enough, you add the element of the unknown factor of this criminal on the run, and it becomes this really, I guess, a scary thing. But then at the same time, you have these situations, I don't know, like, you were speaking about the Towering Inferno before, right?
Yeah.
And I don't know how old you were when you first saw that, but for me, I was pretty young when I first saw that. And I loved that as a kid growing up, and it was scary, and I saw it on TV and maybe rentals. But one of the things I did with the Towering Inferno was I loved the film so much that, like, in my bedroom, I'd maybe set up the pillows and pretend like, oh, I have to jump over this thing. It's like Paul Newman and Jennifer Jones, jumping over the broken stairwell or something. And like when I saw Cave In, I was getting flashbacks because it was kind of like the setups were, it's this kind of set you can tell this is a set,
Yeah.
and it feels like that kind of play acting, like it's a playground that they're playing. So I don't really get the sense of the threat of whatever is the bubbling lava pit. I don't know, or
It's like hot
yeah.
water or something. I don't
Yeah,
know.
yeah, but there's I don't know if it's that scary or suspenseful, but it's definitely a lot of fun.
Yes.
It is
Yes, I
definitely,
agree.
and I think there are some. I'm not sure too, but like, do you know the film Vertigo, the Alfred
Oh yeah.
Hitchcock film? I
Yeah.
think there are some cues of the music.
Yes. Oh my gosh, you noticed that too. Yeah, it's that great. It's the repeating
Yeah, Bernard
Bernard.
Herrmann. Yeah,
But I was like, what is that about? Was that part of like some kind of universal music library? Because at that time, I'm pretty sure that was when Vertigo was MIA. Like you couldn't
yeah.
see Vertigo in the 70s, if I recall, it was out of circulation. So I'm sure people wouldn't have necessarily noticed, but it's so distinct and it's used several times in the film.
Yes, it's very, very obvious, and
Yes.
and I think I don't know if it probably it wasn't done in this way, but I'd like to think that the Leslie Nielsen character is this former cop, and I'd like to think that maybe it was trying to make a link between his character and the James Stewart character in Vertigo. I don't know, some kind
Yes.
of
Clearly.
trauma that happened in the past, and it's now
Clearly.
playing out in real terms in these particular sugars. Maybe it's stretch, but
I
anyway,
like it.
yeah, Caven, well done. Yes, I love it.
Okay.
Yes, great.
I mean, it's almost like the end of the line in terms of the budget has shrunk down so much, but the actual, I mean, I don't know if it's, I don't want to say it's a jump the shark moment, but for me, it kind of is, but I still love it. And that is uh, when time ran out. Now, this is controversial only in that it came out in 1980, and you and I have talked about this. It's technically not a 70s movie, but I do believe that it was probably shot in 79 and is really, but is produced by Irwin Allen, directed by James Goldstone, who obviously also did Roller Coaster. I didn't mention that. Um, and so it has the DNA of 70s disaster in it, really in there. And it's so Towering Inferno, it's ridiculous. I mean, to the point that you have both Paul Newman and William Holden back. You have James Franciscus in this case playing the Richard Chamberlain character. You have, oh, there is a love triangle in this one. I forgot about it. It's the Jacqueline Bisset. She's being romanced by both William Holden and Paul Newman. So yes, another love triangle. Very interesting. But so William Holden again, it's the location is a remote Pacific island, and they've opened this wonderful, gigantic resort. But in sort of conjunction with that, there's also a volcano on this island, and they have this really, for the time, probably very high tech geothermal lab that's literally hanging over the edge of the volcano, which I don't think is a good idea ever. But and they have this incredible elevator that basically will lower you into the volcano, and it has a glass floor so you can look at the bubbling lava below. Who would ever want to do that in their right mind? I have no idea. But we have a great scene where Paul Newman is kind of in this case he's drilling for oil on the island. That's sort of his thing. But he's also very much a similar character to his character in Towering Inferno, in that he is immediately like noticing what's happening and becoming aware and wanting to tell people, we got a problem, we got to get out of here, and so they strike oil on the island, and he and his workers are very excited. And then he's like, guys, I don't know if we can stick around. There's some tremors and the volcano's shaking. James Franciscus has a weird, like, he's kind of gonna maybe be given the resort to run, but he also seems to work at the geothermal station. So I don't really understand how the two work together, but he is very villainous, very slimy. And so he is immediately trying to downplay any drama about the volcano. Everything's fine, no problem. And then he and Paul Newman and this other guy go down in the elevator thing, and there's a big, kind of an explosion, and the elevator almost collapses, and they barely make it out alive. And then, even after that, James Franciscus is just like, no, it's all good. And Paul Newman's like, we got to get out of here. This is bad news. And he tries to talk William Holden into it. And William Holden is kind of like a little wishy-washy again on it. But I think takes to the idea that things are going south a little quicker than he does in Towering Inferno. It's almost like he learned it subconsciously in his head. He learned his lesson. He's like, this time. And what's really funny is you have a great moment of, you know, the Chamberlain character and the Paul Newman character literally dividing everyone at the resort that's left. There's not a ton of people there because the resort is still, I think, in early phases of opening. But there's a point where there's actually like some real, you know, explosions out of the volcano. It's really happening. And he tries to tell people, look, we got to go to the other side of the island now. And James Franciscus is like, no, everything's fine. This like the glass tower, not in this building. This is going to be safe. And so he gets a whole bunch of people to stay, and you end up having just a small group. I didn't even mention the cast. I got carried away. Sorry. You have Alex Karras, Burgess Meredith, Pat Morita, Red Buttons, and Ernest Borgnine. They have the throwaway plot in this case, totally throwaway. Red Buttons has stolen some bonds, and Borgnine is the cop that's chased him to this island, and he's basically going to follow him until he catches him or something. But so that's great because Red Buttons has a mustache and he looks terrible with a mustache. So yeah, you have all these different characters happening, and you have a group that separates out and tries to get away, and then another group that stays at the resort. And I'm not going to say what happens, but you can probably guess. And there's some really great and silly stuff that happens towards the end, some acrobatic stuff, and you know what I'm talking about. And there's a very rickety bridge, which actually makes for, considering how many times we've seen the rickety bridge in tons of movies, that's one of the main set pieces of the movie, is this bridge that's across a literal river of hot lava, and all these people trying to get across, and how they end up sort of solving that situation is both entertaining and suspenseful. But yeah, it's kind of silly, and it's very much retreading Towering Inferno in so many ways, and again, recasting these same actors in a lot of ways. But I really kind of like it. I don't know, there's something about it that I still enjoy watching it, you know. So I don't know where you stand on when time ran out.
I love it. I think
Oh, you do?
oh,
Nice.
this is so, it's great. It's so campy, cheesy. You mentioned, right, the James Franciscus character. You mentioned, yes, there's a love triangle. I think there are actually two love
Oh yeah,
triangles in this one,
you're right.
right?
James Franciscus
Yes,
has one too.
yes. Veronica Hamill, all right, but also Barbara Carrera. So there's
Barbara
that little,
Carrera from
yes,
Condor Man. Oh my gosh, yes.
yes, and Never Say Never Again. Yeah, and so
Yes.
and yeah, I love how you described how it was the William Holden character seems to have learned his lesson from Towering Inferno, because he really gets,
I hadn't
yeah,
thought
actually,
about it, but
yeah, that's a, and Jacqueline Bisset is there, so that's
she's great.
right. So connecting back to the first airport film.
Oh yes, yes.
And so it's almost like full circle
Mm-hmm.
in terms of the cycle of disaster movies, starting with a film starring Jacqueline Bisset, and essentially ending perhaps with a film
I
starring
kind of see
Jacqueline
it as
Bisset.
the end. For me, it's kind of the end, you know, in terms
Yeah.
of this. It's the last gasp, the last theatrical gasp of this stuff. You know, Irwin Allen going out like this is, you know, that's the reason I wanted to bring it up. Despite not technically being a 70s movie, I feel like it kind of closes the decade despite coming out in 1980.
No, I agree with that assessment. And James Franciscus is so he's a great foil or villain. He's got
Yes.
this, I think it's this like father complex or something,
Yeah.
and yeah, he's the Richard Chamberlain of the piece, as it were.
Well, there's
And
a lot of
so
like conniving son-in-laws in these movies, you know, like
yes, and a
just
lot
like
of James Franciscus too. Yeah,
he's in a ton of them. Yeah, no, I'm a big fan of his. Like he's another one that has kind of that Heston clenchy teeth thing that he does that is kind of, I relate him to, he's in the Bradford Dillman Heston spinoff category for me. But I like him. So
and perhaps that also is due to the Planet of the Apes connection.
there you go.
Heston,
That's
and
it.
then
That's it.
Beneath the Planet of the Apes with Francisco, and then
You're
Escape
totally
from the
right.
Planet of the Apes, right, with Bradford
Yes.
Dillman, right?
That's it.
So
You're totally, wow. I totally hadn't
yeah.
put that together, but there's a subconscious thing in there. Yes.
So, but this is a great choice, and Pat Morita is, and Sheila Allen, right, is
Mhm.
there as well, and so I think they're the couple, and they have a really, I think, a real surprising a character arc. And also you mentioned Red Buttons and Ernest Borgnine. That's a kind of flip
Yes.
on their dynamic in the Poseidon adventure, is it
Yes.
not? Yeah.
Yeah, you're right.
So
It's crazy.
yeah, it's great. And so it's corny and cheesy. Maybe it's a little bit for some people, but you're right. It's a lot of what the disaster genre was, and it's a bookend. And
Yeah.
Irwin Allen's involvement and many of the performers. You're absolutely right. And by the way, what's the DVD that you have? I have this one. It looks
Oh,
like the cover
that's
is
a
different.
reissue. I think
Okay.
this was like this is an older one because I don't know if yours is uh made on demand. This is an actual DVD. So I
Okay.
got this
Okay.
before. So that's I think that
Yeah.
one's the reissue, maybe. I
Yes.
don't know.
This is the made on demand version. I think.
Yeah, but I like that cover kind of better. This I don't like this like white all around it. I like yours
What is it?
better.
The Paul Newman film series.
What is that? I don't, you're gonna watch Cool Hand Luke and then When Time Ran Out, I guess. I don't know.
That is great. What do you think
Something
of Paul Newman's character in this, by the way?
I like him. I think he's interesting. Like I said, he's a bit more brooding than he is in Towering Inferno because he has this history with Jacqueline Bisset where he has sort of given up on their relationship and she's the driving force. Like William Holden is romancing her, but she really wants Paul Newman and he's ready to just call it quits. And she sort of reinvigorates their relationship, re-enters his life. He was like, I just got used to not having you around. And so he's a little down. He's a little down in the mouth about all that stuff. So you feel that a little bit more. In Towering Inferno, he's a little more up. He's a little more like he doesn't have those relationship troubles. He's really just about the building in Towering Inferno mostly.
Yeah, I like how you've emphasized the love triangle among Jacqueline Bisset's character, William Holden's character, and Paul Newman's character, because there's a scene early on where I think William Holden's character and Jacqueline Bisset's character are like in an office, and
Yeah.
then Paul Newman comes in, and Paul Newman leaves, goes to the elevator, and then Jacqueline Bisset very, very conspicuously says, "Oh, I have to leave. Let me leave the room and come back in a minute." And she goes into the hallway, and there's this huge like romance scene or something between the two characters. So you think if I were William Holden, I'd think there's something going on between the two of them, right? But anyway, yeah.
Yeah, and there's a great moment of like recognition of defeat from the loser of the romantic. I'm not gonna give away who
Yeah.
wins,
Yeah.
but it's definitely a moment where you're just like, oh, they gave it a moment where he's like acknowledging, okay, all right, I lost, kind of. But I only have one more, and it's backtracking a little bit to 73. But I'm curious if you're a fan of this one because this is another one I tried to dig out. I don't think you've covered it yet, but maybe it's in the pipeline. And that is the Neptune Factor from 1973. Okay, so you're a fan. So yeah, this one I liked. I'd seen this, and then I rewatched the Blu-ray the other night, and this Blu-ray is actually really good. Like this has an audio commentary, it has an isolated score track. Lalo Schifrin did the score. It has another two isolated score tracks, TV featurette. Anyway, so this one is back to Borgnine. We've got Borgnine again, and we have another staple. Yvette Mimieux is a staple of these too. She pops up in a bunch. And then you have Walter Pidgeon, who's also in a ton of them, and I'm sure he's in some of the ones I've talked about, and I just forgot to mention him. And you have Ben Gazzara in, I think, the only disaster movie he ever did. And this one, it's a little tricky to call it a disaster movie, but I think it fits. Basically, you have this undersea lab that Borgnine works as a diver as part of, which is funny. And they've been doing research for several months, and they're about to come up, and suddenly there's a giant earthquake, and the sea lab is ripped off its hinges, its where it's been put in the ground, and swept away. And so it's gone. Like, and in this case, you have Yvette Mimieux is I think a scientist, and she's dating one of the guys who's working in the lab. And so her driving force is like, we need to find the lab. He's my guy is in the lab. And then they end up having to send Ben Gazzara, who I can't remember if he works for the corporation that owns the lab or what, but he has this submersible submarine and he's the captain of it. And he's very like, he's pretty grumpy. He's pretty like no nonsense. Like the safety of my ship and my crew comes before finding this. He really isn't interested in saving these people. He's like, we'll give it a shallow try and we'll see what happens. But he slowly comes around to it. So then you have basically Yvette Mimieux, Ernest Borgnine, and oh man, I'm going to forget the other actor that's in the sub with them, but he's very familiar. I can't remember his name right now. and then you have Walter Pigeon topside as another doctor that's sort of helping them out. And so they go underwater and they end up finding this um, sort of area where there's a warm sort of not jet stream but current, and something has happened in this area where all the plant life and fish and crustaceans are gigantic. And so it's really kind of the cheesy, disaster movie trope of using miniatures, which I actually love. I love the use of miniatures in all these movies where they've used them. In this case, you have a tiny toy submarine and real fish. And the movie's very trippy in some sense because the movie will stop at some points to just look at the giant fish. And then the fish become unfriendly and they start to attack the sub. And then you have a lobster or a crab attacking the sub. You have eels. And will they find the underwater sea lab? And but I really enjoyed it more this time on this rewatch than I had previously. It worked. I think before I was like, what is with all this stopping down for the fish? But this time I just kind of was able to get into the spirit of it, the spectacle of it, that I'm sure was the case in 1973. Watching this on a big screen, these giant fish, this tiny sub, and this cast, it's a fun group, and Borgnine just always delivers for me. He never doesn't show up and do exactly what I need him to do. So this was a fun one, and I feel like really underrepresented. Not for everybody. Not everybody's going to love this, but it looks like you dig this one. So I'd love to hear what you think.
Yeah, I didn't see it until that Blu-ray release came up. And so I caught up with it rather late in life, I suppose. But I wish I had seen it when I was younger, because this feels like a film that like little kids would like. There's a sense of spectacle and adventure, and the idea of movie making, as you said, with all these shots and the effects. And then you mentioned, right, Yvette Mimieux, she appears in a number of these disaster films, like I think one that came up for me recently was like Skyjacked.
Yes, I love Skyjack, by the way. I love that you talked about that.
Oh, it's a great one. And then Ernest Borgnine, of course, he's now a legend in these, but right. And there's also a kind of that there's going to be a reunion, I think, between the two of them again. I don't know. I don't follow. I'm not the biggest. I don't know all their films in their filmography, but I think like The Black Hole, right? So
yes.
yeah,
Yes.
so yeah, so which might fall as a disaster film. I don't know, of sorts, but
it's
in
kind
any
of a
event,
space disaster movie. Yeah, I
yeah,
like that. I like
yeah.
that. Good reach, but I like it.
Yeah, but yeah. Oh, this is a great pick. This is a great, and the Blu-ray release is another great one. So yeah. Oh, wonderful choice. And that's one that I think doesn't get mentioned a lot in like maybe the articles online about the greatest disaster films ever. I don't think it gets mentioned that much, but it should, and it broadens the scope of the disaster film genre in a very good way, I think. So yeah, no, I agree, 100%. I agree. Yeah.
But yeah, that's all I got. Thank you for letting me put together a group of films like this.
Oh, wonderful. So just to remind us, so could you just let us know again what those choices or recommendations were?
Absolutely. Let me get back to the top of the stack here. So I started with Towering Inferno. So we start with Towering Inferno, and then we went to Earthquake, and then we went to Roller Coaster, and then The Swarm, and these are all part of my classics. And then in terms of the TV movies, we have The Beasts Are on the Streets, we have Flood, and of course in tandem with Fire, and then of course Cave In, and The Bookend, When Time Ran Out, and then we close with Neptune Factor.
And of those, I have been introduced to The Beasts Are on the Streets, so I'm gonna. This is over. I have to order that one because I need to watch that one now. I'm just, oh my goodness!
I hope you like it. I hope I haven't built it up too much, but for me, it's just an absolute fun time to watch it.
And I know I know I didn't ask you this before, but of the other ones, could you just mention, were there any like honorable mentions or any other titles in passing that you'd like to say? You if you have them available, that's fine. If not, you can just mention whatever you feel is okay. But are there other examples that you want to mention? Uh,
Sure. I mean, some of these you've already covered. I think like the Hindenburg. I'm definitely a fan of that one. Of course, Poseidon. Um, and then in terms of the airport movies, this is gonna be a little strange, but I'm a big Airport 77 fan. Uh, Airport 77 is my jam when it comes to the airport movies. I just really like that one. I love the idea of a sunken airplane and Jack Lemmon and yeah, that's just the one that has stuck with me the most. I think those are mostly honorable. Oh, there was one that I saw recently. I meant to mention called "Disaster on the Coastliner," and that one is another TV movie, and that is from 1979. So it just squeaks in at the end. But it's got a good cast. It's directed by Richard C. Sarafian, who did Vanishing Point, which I love. And it has Lloyd Bridges. It has Raymond Burr. It has Pat Hingle, E.G. Marshall. Yvette Mimieux is in that one. William Shatner is in it, and he's this great, like, on the run criminal. But it's got a great plot where you have the guy from Crime Wave, the bald, heavy set dude from Crime Wave is like the computer tech at this railroad company, and he sets up at the beginning of the film this sabotage where he basically pulls out some part of the computer that would stop these two trains from colliding. And so you basically have two trains coming at each other, and Pat Hingle is driving one of the trains, and the guy has like fooled him into thinking that somebody's trying to get him to stop the train, and he can't let them stop it at any cost. So that one's pretty fun. I had never seen that one before, and Shatner's just so ridiculous in it that I really kind of enjoyed it. But that one I found on Amazon Prime. I don't have that on disc anywhere.
Thank you very much. So I'll have to check that one out as well. And also, I echo your sentiments on Airport 77. By the way,
Nice.
that's one. It's a plane in the ocean, the Bermuda Triangle, sleeping gas,
Yes, sleeping gas.
like valuable artwork. You have a
Yep.
couple. I love this. You have a couple played by what is it? Lee Grant and Christopher Lee. So
Yes.
Lee playing the couple, and you think, why goodness, Christopher Lee plays a character you don't expect.
Not at all.
And who else is in that cast? What a great cast! It's Jack Lemmon, Brenda Vaccaro, James Stewart.
Oh yeah, James Stewart. That's the big one. He's the patriarch guy.
Yeah, and Christopher Lee Grant, and Kathleen Quinlan.
Yes.
And Joseph Cotton and Olivia de Havilland as well.
Yes, Olivia de Havilland again. Darren
and George Kennedy. Yeah.
And George. Yeah, it's a really good cast. Like, Robert Hooks, who I like a lot from Trouble Man.
And are there any other, like, in passing too, who would you say are some of the great performers that have appeared time and again in these disaster films, the 1970s? We mentioned a few, but if you had to mention,
Borgnine's pretty much the top for me, just in terms of, like, just always delivers. George Kennedy is another one. I didn't happen to pick a bunch of films with him in them, but I mean, he's all over the airport stuff, and he's great. Like, I like him a lot. I'm trying to think who are some of your favorites, because now I'm blanking on some of the other regulars.
So maybe people like, well, Charlton Heston appears in a lot of them.
Of course, yes.
And there's, well, gosh, who? Henry Fonda.
Yep.
Right.
Big fan of all his appearances too.
Henry Fonda's there. I don't know. Gosh. Maybe Richard Harris as well.
Oh yeah.
There's a lot of him. Well, not as much as others, but Cassandra Crossing and
I almost was going to talk about that too, but I didn't get a chance to rewatch it, and I wanted to do that if I was going to talk about it.
Is the Cassandra Crossing, is that what's the blue? Do you have that on Blu-ray?
Yeah, it's a double disc with the Domino Principle. I think it's a Shout Factory Blu-ray.
Oh, is that out of print now?
Maybe stuff like that from Shout might go out of print, but it could also be available cheap. I've seen some of those where when they went out of print, somebody still has it in stock in some weird place, that kind of stuff.
Yeah, because I have that on a Japanese blue. It's that's a great one too with
Yeah.
um, Sophia Loren and Ava Gardner. That's
Yep.
another one. Ava Gardner, she appears in a lot of these as well.
Absolutely. Yep.
And Martin Sheen doing handstands,
That's right.
like handstands in his underwear, and so and then a train, and then there's a
Trains are a big deal in these too. I
right,
like
right.
train
There's
movies.
also O.J. Simpson, which is
Oh
a
yeah,
right,
OJ's
yeah,
a regular.
yeah,
Yep. Yeah.
yeah,
He's in Towering and
yeah,
yeah.
yeah,
Hmm.
and so that's pretty that's interesting to look back on, like the scenes like OJ Simpson and the cat in the Towering Inferno. That's a lot. There's a lot of stuff there that
Oh yeah.
especially that I don't know if that's dated so well actually,
No, not
but
particularly.
but yeah, so yeah, there's so many, and then you mentioned Yvette Mimieux and others. So oh, this is great. Are there, how should they put it? Are there any particular releases on physical media that you think are really, really sound and well worth checking out in terms of presentation and the special features that are offered for any of these films or any others that you might that are fall in the genre?
I mean, the ones I've shown off, I think, especially the top three, although the Swarm only has like a well, it's a interesting archival 22-minute making of, which I think is pretty cool to see. Actually, just to see Irwin Allen directing, I think is really fun because he's like a very East Coast guy, and he's got a certain no nonsense but still very jovial nature about him. So that one, but yeah, Earthquake is a great disc. We already talked about that. Towering Inferno, I think is, I mean, it's porting over. I don't know if there's anything new that hasn't been done on a previous special edition DVD, but the features on that are good. And Roller Coaster, I think, had some features on it too. I dropped my discs on the floor. I can't reach them now, unfortunately. But yeah, and then this I know that you have this, but this Airport Complete Collection is pretty great. I'm a pretty big fan of it. I mean, I don't remember all the features that this has, but I just love having all these movies together in one. In fact, this might not have a ton of features now that I think about it. I don't see any, but I just thought that's a great set. I just love the Shout Factory stuff. The Earthquake and the Roller Coaster discs, and shoot, I don't have my 2 minute warning. 2 minute warning is another one that I dig, and I think you've talked about that one too. That's a weird, again, man-made, disaster kind of movie. But yeah, that's got a TV version on it or something as well, and so those Shout Factory releases are pretty strong, I think.
And I should also point out, it didn't come up in conversation, but I would be remiss if I didn't thank you in person for introducing me to the imprint line.
Oh,
And so the Black Sunday,
oh yes, that's a good one.
yes, yes. And this, I think, could fall also within the disaster genre, although it
Absolutely,
may be the man-made type.
very much.
And I had this on a separate release, a DVD, but I wasn't aware. Yes, I wasn't aware of this until I caught some of your discussions about the label, and so I was able to get my hands on a copy of this. And this is, thank you so much for this, because
Oh,
it
I'm
has
so glad.
it has a great commentary, Stephen Prince, and some other supplements as well. And it's a nice presentation of this, and it's a great film overall. So I want to thank you very much for introducing me to the imprint line.
My pleasure. Yeah, they're
Yeah.
great, newish label, and I like what they're doing a lot. And that's a great example of the kind of stuff that they're bringing out that nobody else had touched previous. So it's kind of neat for disaster movie fans like you and me to get a Black Sunday release. I was excited about it.
Yeah, fantastic. Do you have Juggernaut, by the
I
way?
do. That's a good one as well. I have the old Kino Blu-ray of that.
Ugh,
Not handy, but I like that one actually quite a bit. In fact,
ugh.
that's one I should have brought up because that's really solid. And I just noticed, I think today, you were talking about Meteor. I actually like Meteor quite a bit too.
this
I have that as well.
this one, right? Yeah, this one.
Yes, that's the
Yeah, yeah,
one. That's
yeah.
the one.
This has pretty much, it's pretty spare, I think.
Oh, that's too bad. I forgot.
In terms of supplement. That's okay because the film itself is amazing. And yeah, Carl Malden
Oh,
and
he's
Martin
kind of a
Landau.
Doesn't Malden pops up in a few of these? I feel like
Yeah, Beyond the
maybe just
Poseidon
that one. Oh,
Adventure, and
that's the one. Yep.
yeah, yeah, I think yeah, and Michael Caine's or Sally Field is in that one too.
Yeah.
But that's a great, and also what's his name? Why am I Telly Savalas?
Telly Savalas.
Yeah,
Yes.
what a
Great
great,
villain in Beyond the
uh,
Poseidon Adventure.
and Peter Boyle as well.
Hmm.
So that's how do you feel about Beyond the Poseidon Adventure, by the way?
I like it. I was actually I was considering it for, this group, but I was rewatching it and it wasn't quite as compelling as I remembered. But also I've been a little scattered. If I'm honest, I've had a lot going on and I wasn't able to give it my full attention. And so I was probably unfair to the movie. But I know it's regularly programmed at the New Beverly. So it seems like Tarantino's probably a fan of it. As I can tell you are. And I need to come back to it again. Like I'm kind of hoping somebody will pick that up for Blu-ray at some point because as far as I know, it doesn't have a blue just yet.
Yeah, that would be a great like double pack. Poseidon Adventure and Beyond the Poseidon Adventure.
Yes.
That would be fantastic. I don't know if Criterion would able to release those in corresponding spine numbers or something, but that would be amazing. But yeah, I don't think Beyond the Poseidon Adventure is on Blue. I don't think it's. I have it on DVD disc.
Yeah, me too. Somewhere.
But oh, this is what I'm very jealous about Juggernaut. I'm very jealous that you have that Blu-ray. I don't have that. I have a Japanese DVD release of it. But that's the
It's another bare bones. I don't think it. Okay, don't quote me on that because I got to go find it now. But I don't think it had a commentary or anything like that. But that's a really great movie and well done, suspenseful. It's Richard Lester. I mean that's a really neat that he got a chance to do one of these more or less. And yeah, that's a great choice. I can't believe I forgot that. Really good stuff.
that's one that I think the Blu-ray is out of print. I think.
Oh no.
Don't quote me on that, but I think it is. It's so and I'm that's one that I wish I got. So I'm very jealous that you have that on Blue. But that's a great one. That's a great one too. But oh, my dear friend, this has been an honor and a learning experience. Every time I watch one of your videos or listen to one of your podcast episodes, my cart gets that much fuller, on the
My
and the
cart
shop.
runneth over.
Yeah. But
That's very kind. That's very kind.
and I never do, I never do the thing of save for later. I always just say yes, order. So this is another
Good man.
great opportunity for me, another learning experience. You are the great guru and expert and of these films and also the releases. And so I really want to thank you so much for your time today, Brian. Truly, it's been such an honor.
It's been an honor on my end too, sir. I consider you a guru of the same caliber of just the knowledge of the physical media and films that you have and the time and thought that you put into all your videos. I've always appreciated that. And you go deeper than I can go. Like I've lost the ability to go as deep as you do. And I really respect that. So I hugely appreciate you having me back on. It was a delightful conversation, as I knew it would be. So thank you.
Thank you very much, my dear friend Brian. And before we go, just one more thing. Just could you let us know again about where people could find you, podcast and YouTube and otherwise?
Sure. So we have the Pure Cinema podcast. That's available wherever you get both my podcasts or wherever you get your podcasts. Just the Dis is also anywhere you get your podcasts, Spotify, iTunes, Stitcher. They're all over the place. And then in terms of social media, we have the Twitter, Pure Cinema Pod. We also have an Instagram for that, Pure Cinema Pod, and Just the Dis Pod, Twitter and Instagram. And then the YouTube channel, it doesn't have a URL that's notable. You would just look up Just the Dis YouTube and it should come up there. Or if you look at the Twitter feed, I have the YouTube linked in the profile of that. Same thing for the Instagram. So that's where I'm at.
Great. Thank you so much. And I'll be sure to include as much of that information in the description box of this video so people
Thank
can
you so
check
much.
it out. I'm sure people who are watching this already know of your great work, but just in case people are meeting you for the first time here, Once again, I strongly recommend it. This is but a sampling of the enthusiasm and deep knowledge that you're going to get every single time.
Very
And
kind, sir. Very
so
kind.
it's one of the great resources for me to learn many new things about this thing that we love, which is cinema. So, Mr. Brian Saur, thank you so much, and we'll talk again very soon, my friend.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you.